I still remember the exact sound of their laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear at weddings when someone makes a toast. It was sharp. It was cruel. It was the kind of laughter that cuts through champagne bubbles and settles deep in your chest like ice. I was standing near the dessert table in my burgundy dress, the one I'd spent 3 weeks choosing because I wanted to look dignified, not overdressed. Not like I was trying too hard to impress my son's new in-laws. And then I heard her voice, clear as crystal, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the old fat pig we have to put up with." The words didn't feel real at first, like maybe I'd misheard, like maybe she was talking about someone else. But then I saw her hand, perfectly manicured, pointing directly at me. Her champagne glass tilted in my direction like a weapon. And her family, her wealthy, sophisticated family, they laughed. They actually laughed. I looked at my son, my Bradley, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died. The young man whose education I'd paid for, whose dreams I'd supported, whose wedding I'd just funded with every last penny I could spare. He was looking at the floor. Not at me. Not at his new wife. Just at the floor, like if he stared hard enough, he could disappear into it. That's when I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. That would come later. This was something harder. Something I didn't even know I'd been building all these years. It was the wall I'd put up between who I really was and who I'd been pretending to be for my son's sake. And in that moment, watching them laugh, I realized something that would change everything. They had no idea who I really was. If this story touches your heart, would you take just a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel? It truly helps me continue sharing these stories with you. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what happened that day, you need to understand how we got there. My name is Vivian Monroe. Though these days, some people know me by my maiden name, Vivian Lancaster. I'm 61 years old now. I've lived in Chicago all my life, in the same modest 3-bedroom house my husband and I bought 32 years ago when we were young and foolish and believed love could conquer anything. He was right about one thing. Love did conquer quite a lot. But cancer conquered more. My husband, Thomas, though everyone called him Tom, died when our son Bradley was only 12 years old. 12. That terrible age when boys are just starting to become men, when they need their fathers most. Tom was a real estate developer. A good one. Not the flashy kind you see on television, but the steady, reliable kind who understood buildings and people and how to make both work together. He'd inherited his family's small property management company and had been slowly, carefully growing it into something bigger. We were partners in everything. I handled the books, the contracts, the endless paperwork that keeps a business running. He handled the people, the properties, the vision. When he died, everyone expected me to sell the company. Even his own family suggested it. "You're a widow with a young son," they said. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." But I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as Tom's legacy. Our legacy. The future we'd been building together for Bradley. So I didn't sell. I learned. I studied. I worked 16-hour days while raising a grieving 12-year-old boy who'd lost his hero. Those were hard years. So hard that sometimes I'd sit in Tom's office late at night, surrounded by his papers and his coffee-stained notebooks, and I'd cry until I couldn't breathe. But I never let Bradley see that. Children need stability. They need to believe their remaining parent has everything under control, even when that parent is drowning. I pushed through. And slowly, year by year, the company grew. By the time Bradley went to college, Lancaster Property Group. I'd changed the name back to my maiden name after Tom died, to honor both our families. Had become one of the most respected mid-sized real estate firms in Chicago. Not the biggest, but solid, trusted, profitable. Bradley never really understood what I did. To him, I was just Mom, the woman who made his breakfast and helped with homework and showed up to every parent-teacher conference, even when I was exhausted beyond measure. He knew we weren't struggling financially. He knew he could go to a good college without drowning in debt. But he never asked questions about how that happened. And I never pushed the information on him. Maybe that was my first mistake. I raised him to be independent, to make his own way, to not rely on family money or connections. I wanted him to be proud of his own achievements, not to ride on his mother's coattails. But somewhere along the way, I think that translated into something else in his mind. I think he started seeing my success as something separate from our family, something that didn't quite belong to him. He went to business school, a good one, with an MBA that cost more than most people's houses. I paid for every semester, every textbook, every living expense. Gladly. That's what parents do, isn't it? We sacrifice so our children can have more than we did. After graduation, Bradley got a job at a consulting firm. He was making decent money. Not wealthy, but comfortable. He had his own apartment, his own car, his own life. I was proud. So proud I could burst. And then he met Andrea. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments. It always warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. Andrea Fitzgerald was everything Bradley had never been exposed to growing up. She came from old money. The kind of Chicago family that's had wealth for so many generations they don't even think about it anymore. It's just air they breathe. Her father, Lawrence Fitzgerald, owned Fitzgerald Holdings. On paper, it was a commercial real estate empire worth billions. In reality, I'd later discover, it was a house of cards held together by credit lines and family reputation. But that's getting ahead of myself. When Bradley first told me about Andrea, his voice changed. Got higher, younger, like he was a teenager with his first crush instead of a 31-year-old man. She's amazing, Mom, he said over dinner at my house. She's smart, she's beautiful, she's got this incredible family. Her sister's wedding was at the Four Seasons. Can you imagine? I could imagine. I'd attended events at the Four Seasons. I'd hosted business dinners there. But I didn't say that. I just smiled and asked to see pictures. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair that looked like it cost a fortune to maintain. Perfect smile. The kind of polished elegance that comes from private schools and cotillion classes and summers in Martha's Vineyard. When do I get to meet her? I asked. Bradley hesitated. Just for a second, but I noticed. Soon. I just want to make sure we're serious first. That hesitation should have warned me. But I was too happy for my son to pay attention to warning signs. 6 months later, he called to tell me they were engaged. I cried. Happy tears, I thought. My baby was getting married. The wedding's going to be big, he said. His voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to ask for something. Andrea's family, they have certain expectations. Of course, I said. Do you need help with anything? Another hesitation. Actually, Mom, we need to talk about the budget. That's when he told me about Andrea's sister's wedding, about her cousin's wedding, about how the Fitzgerald family celebrated marriages with events that cost more than most people make in 5 years. The venues Andrea's looking at start around $200,000, he said quickly, like ripping off a bandage. Just for the basics. $200,000. I'd paid less than that for my house. But I looked at my son's face, so hopeful and anxious, and I thought about Tom. About how he'd always been too generous with Bradley, too willing to give him anything he wanted. About how I'd promised myself I'd continue Tom's legacy of love and support. Let me think about it, I said. That night, I sat in Tom's old office, my office now, and looked at his photograph on the desk. He was smiling, the way he always smiled, like the whole world was a wonderful joke only he understood. What would you do? I asked his picture. But I already knew the answer. Tom would have said yes. Tom never could deny Bradley anything. So I said yes too. $300,000. That's what the wedding ended up costing. Every flower, every place setting, every note of music, every bite of food, every bubble of champagne. All paid for by me. The Fitzgerald family never offered to contribute. Not once. And Bradley never asked them to. I should have asked why. I should have wondered what that meant about how his new family saw us. But I was too busy making sure my son had the wedding of his dreams. Or rather, the wedding of Andrea's dreams. I barely saw Bradley during the planning. Andrea's mother, Constance, took charge of everything. I was sent a dress code. Elegant but understated, please. And a seating assignment back table near the kitchen doors. The mother of the groom, relegated to the shadows of her son's wedding. But I told myself it didn't matter. The day wasn't about me. It was about Bradley's happiness. And if Andrea's family wanted to run the show, let them. As long as my son was happy. The wedding day arrived. September 23rd. A beautiful autumn day with leaves just starting to turn gold, and the air crisp with the promise of winter. I wore my burgundy dress. Simple, elegant, expensive but not showy. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I wanted to look my best for my son. At the church, I sat in the front row. They couldn't take that away from me, at least, and watched Bradley standing at the altar. He looked so much like his father in that moment. Same height, same broad shoulders, same nervous habit of adjusting his cufflinks when he was anxious. I'd given him his father's cufflinks that morning, the ones Tom wore at our wedding. "Dad would be so proud of you," I'd whispered, straightening his bow tie. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd said. But he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "I know the wedding cost a fortune. You're worth every penny," I'd told him. And I'd meant it. At the altar, watching Andrea walk down the aisle in her $15,000 dress, I felt such hope, such certainty that this was the beginning of something beautiful for my son. I had no idea I was watching the beginning of the end. If this story is speaking to you, please consider subscribing. These stories come from real places, real pain, real healing. Your support means everything. The reception was held at the Chicago History Museum, Andrea's choice, because her family had donated money for the renovation of the main hall. Everything was perfect. Crystal chandeliers, silk tablecloths, centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. I found my seat at table 14. Not the family table, where Andrea's parents and siblings sat. Not even close to Bradley's table, where he sat with Andrea and their wedding party. Table 14 was in the back corner, near the kitchen doors, with some distant relatives of Andrea's that I'd never met. But I didn't complain. I smiled. I made small talk. I complimented the flowers. I was determined to be the perfect mother-in-law. Supportive, unobtrusive, grateful to be included in this glamorous family my son was marrying into. The speeches began after dinner. Andrea's father, Lawrence, stood up with his champagne glass and talked about his daughter, about how she'd always been destined for greatness, about how she'd chosen so well with Bradley. "We're thrilled to welcome him into the Fitzgerald family," Lawrence said, raising his glass. Into their family, as if Bradley didn't have a family of his own. But I smiled and clapped with everyone else. Then Andrea's maid of honor spoke. Then the best man. Then Bradley himself, thanking everyone for coming, thanking Andrea's parents for hosting such a beautiful event. He thanked them for hosting the event I'd paid for. But he didn't mention me. Not once. I told myself it didn't matter. Wedding speeches are emotional and rushed. He probably forgot. It meant nothing. After the speeches, people started mingling. The dancing began. I stood near the dessert table, watching Bradley and Andrea's first dance, feeling both proud and strangely distant. That's when I heard Andrea's voice behind me. I turned, thinking she was coming to thank me or perhaps to share a moment with her new mother-in-law. But she was talking to a group of her friends and family, about 6 or 7 people, all holding champagne glasses, all dressed in clothes that cost more than my car. And Andrea was gesturing at me. "This is the one I was telling you about," she was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of amused superiority. "Bradley's mother. You should see how she tries to insert herself into every decision we make." My heart stopped. "She's been hovering since the engagement," Andrea continued. "Calling every week, asking about plans, offering opinions no one asked for. I had to be so firm about boundaries. I'd called once a week, to check in, to ask if there was anything I could do to help. That's what mothers do, isn't it?" One of Andrea's cousins laughed. "Oh God, the clingy mother-in-law type. How exhausting." "Exhausting is exactly the word," Andrea agreed. "And she's so, I don't know how to say this nicely, middle class about everything. Like she doesn't understand how things work in families like ours. Middle class." The term fell from her lips like an insult. I stood there, frozen, listening to them dissect my character, like I was some amusing curiosity instead of a human being. Instead of the woman who'd paid for every flower in their hands, every bite of food on their plates. And then Andrea said it. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the old fat pig we have to put up with." She gestured at me with her champagne glass. And they laughed. All of them. Like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I waited for someone to object. For someone to say that was cruel. For someone to remind Andrea that I was standing right there, that I could hear every word. But no one did. And then I saw Lawrence Fitzgerald's face change. The color drained from it like someone had pulled a plug. His champagne glass trembled in his hand. He was staring at me. Really staring, like he was seeing me for the first time. "Wait," he said slowly. His voice had gone quiet. "Careful. Aren't you Vivian Lancaster?" The group went silent. "Lancaster?" Andrea frowned. "No, Bradley's mother is Vivian Monroe." "Dad, what are you talking about?" But Lawrence wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at me with an expression I'd seen before. On business rivals. On people who'd just realized they'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Vivian Lancaster, he repeated. Of Lancaster Property Group. I didn't say anything. Just looked at him steadily. He swallowed hard. You're my new CEO. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Andrea's smile faltered. What? Dad, what are you talking about? But I could see understanding beginning to dawn in Lawrence's eyes. Real understanding. The kind that comes with consequences. Would you do me a small favor? Take a second to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes these words find exactly the person who needs them most. Let me explain what Lawrence Fitzgerald had just realized. What none of them knew. What I'd been keeping quiet about for Bradley's sake. Lancaster Property Group wasn't just a mid-sized real estate firm anymore. Over the past 15 years, I'd been quietly, carefully, strategically building something much bigger. And 3 years ago, I'd started buying shares in Fitzgerald Holdings. Not all at once. That would have drawn attention. Just small amounts whenever they became available. A few percent here. A few percent there. Patiently. Methodically. Lawrence's grandfather had been the junior partner in a real estate venture with my husband's family back in 1952. The Fitzgeralds had managed the business beautifully over the decades, but they'd always been minority shareholders. When Tom died, his shares passed to me. 35% of Fitzgerald Holdings. The Fitzgeralds owned 40%. The remaining 25% was scattered among various investors. And over the past 3 years, I'd been purchasing those scattered shares. As of last Monday, 5 days before Bradley's wedding, I'd secured 51% of Fitzgerald Holdings. Controlling interest. The board had voted me in as CEO the previous Tuesday. My first official day was supposed to be the Monday after Bradley's wedding. Lawrence knew this. He'd been at the board meeting. He'd voted against my appointment, of course, but he'd been outvoted by directors I'd carefully cultivated relationships with over the past decade. What he hadn't known until this exact moment was that his new CEO was his son-in-law's mother, the woman his daughter had just called a pig. Mrs. Lancaster, Lawrence stammered, his champagne glass still trembling. I had no idea. Andrea never mentioned. Mentioned what, Daddy? Andrea's voice was sharp with confusion. She looked between us, her perfect smile finally cracking. What's going on? I took a breath. Smiled. The same smile I'd used in countless board meetings over the years. It's nice to officially meet you, Lawrence, I said calmly. I look forward to our meeting Monday morning. 9 a.m. sharp, I believe. Andrea was starting to understand now. I could see it in her face. The color draining away. The panic setting in. You're saying, you work for my father's company? Not quite, dear, I said gently. I own controlling interest in your father's company. Which means technically, your father works for me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the music seemed to fade away. Andrea's mother, Constance, appeared at her husband's elbow. She'd been smiling when she walked up, but the smile died when she saw her husband's face. What's happening? She asked quietly. Vivian Lancaster, Lawrence said, like that explained everything. And to Constance, it apparently did. Her face went pale too. Oh my God, Constance whispered. Bradley's mother is someone with a 40-year career in commercial real estate. I finished for her. Someone who's been expanding her late husband's business interests for the past 3 decades. Someone who now owns 51% of your husband's company. I looked around at their shocked faces. At Andrea, who looked like she might be sick. At Lawrence, who looked like he wanted to disappear. At Constance, who was gripping her husband's arm so tight her knuckles were white. This is a lovely wedding, I said pleasantly. You must have spent a fortune on it. Thank you for making my son's day so special. And then I walked away. Behind me, I could hear Andrea's voice rising in panic. Daddy, she can't. This doesn't. But I didn't look back. I walked straight through the reception hall, past the dancing couples, past the tables full of expensive food, past everything I'd paid for. I found Bradley standing near the bar with some of his groomsmen. He saw me coming and his face lit up. Mom, are you having a good time? I looked at my son. This man I'd raised. This person I'd sacrificed everything for. And I wondered how much he'd known. How much he'd told Andrea about me. Whether he'd deliberately downplayed my success to make himself seem more impressive. I'm leaving, sweetheart, I said quietly. Congratulations again. His smile faded. Leaving. But we haven't even cut the cake yet. I'm very tired. It's been a long day. Is everything okay? He looked concerned now. Genuine concern. Or maybe just worry about how it would look if his mother left early. Everything's fine, I lied. We'll talk soon. I kissed his cheek. He smelled like his father's cologne. I'd given him that bottle for his birthday. Love you, Mom, he said automatically. Love you too, baby. And then I left my son's wedding. The wedding I'd paid $300,000 for. The wedding where his new wife had called me a pig. If this story is moving you, would you take just a moment to leave a comment? Even just a word or two. It helps more than you know, and I love reading each one. I didn't cry on the drive home. I'd learned a long time ago that crying while driving is dangerous. So I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel, and breathed carefully through the tightness in my chest. When I got home, I kicked off my heels, expensive shoes that hurt but looked elegant, and walked straight to Tom's office. Our office. My office. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey from the bottle I kept in the desk drawer. Tom's favorite brand. I only drank it on the hardest days. This qualified. I sat in his leather chair, worn soft from decades of use, and looked at his photograph on the desk. He was 38 in that picture. Healthy. Alive. Smiling that crooked smile he had whenever I took his picture. I messed up, I told him. I raised him wrong somehow. Tom's picture didn't answer, of course. But I could almost hear his voice anyway. That gentle voice he used when I was being too hard on myself. You loved him. That's never wrong. But it wasn't enough, was it? I said to the empty room. Love without boundaries. Support without expectations. I gave him everything and taught him nothing about what it costs. My phone buzzed. A text from Andrea's mother, Constance. Mrs. Lancaster, we need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I turned my phone face down on the desk and took another sip of whiskey. No, there hadn't been a misunderstanding. There had been perfect, crystal clear understanding. They'd understood exactly what they thought of me. They just hadn't understood who I was. The calls started around 11 that night. First Constance, then Lawrence, then Andrea herself, her voice high and panicked on my voicemail. Mrs. Mrs. Lancaster, I'm so sorry about what happened. I was nervous and I said something stupid. Please, can we talk? I deleted each message without listening to the end. By midnight, Bradley called. I almost didn't answer. But he was my son. No matter what, he was my son. Mom. His voice was confused. Hurt. Andrea told me something happened at the reception. She said you're Lawrence's boss now? How is that possible? It's been in the works for several years, I said calmly. I didn't mention it because it didn't seem relevant to your relationship with Andrea. Not relevant. Mom, her family is freaking out. They're saying you own their company. They're saying you've been hiding this. I wasn't hiding anything, Bradley. You never asked what I did for a living. You never showed any interest in my work. So I didn't push it on you. Silence on his end. This is going to make things so complicated, he finally said. Andrea's family feels ambushed. Andrea's family should feel grateful that I'm a professional who separates business from personal relationships, I said. My voice was still calm, but something hard was growing in my chest. Although after tonight, I'm reconsidering that policy. What happened tonight? Andrea said she made a joke that you misunderstood. A joke. The word came out sharper than I intended. Bradley, your wife called me a fat pig in front of her entire family. That's not a joke. That's cruelty. She was nervous. She was cruel. There's a difference. More silence. Mom, I know Andrea can be. She's used to a certain lifestyle. She doesn't always think before she speaks. But she's my wife now. Can't you just, move past it? I closed my eyes, breathed slowly. Bradley, how much did you tell her about me? What do you mean? Before you got married. What did you tell Andrea about your mother? He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I heard everything I needed to know. I told her the truth, he said carefully. That you raised me alone. That you run a small property management company. That you can be a bit much sometimes. A bit much. A bit much how? I asked quietly. Calling all the time. Asking about our plans. Offering to help with things we didn't ask for help with. Andrea felt like you were trying to control everything. I thought about my once-weekly phone calls. About my careful questions about whether they needed any help with the wedding. about my desperate attempts to be part of my son's new life without being intrusive. And I realized that everything Andrea had said at the reception, everything that had cut so deep, had come from Bradley. I see, I said. Mom, don't be like that. I was just trying to manage expectations. Andrea's family has money, and I didn't want them to think you were. Was what, Bradley? He didn't answer. Poor, I suggested. Needy. A burden. An embarrassment. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that I paid for every expense of your education, your car, your apartment, and your wedding while you told your wife I was a bit much. It's not fair that I raised you alone while building a business empire, and you described that business as a small property management company. It's not fair that I've spent 30 years supporting you unconditionally while you've apparently spent 31 years resenting me for it. My voice was still quiet, calm, but every word landed like a stone. Mom, I have an early meeting Monday morning, I said. With your father-in-law. We should both get some rest. Mom, please. I know you're upset, but... Good night, Bradley. I hung up before he could respond. And then, finally, alone in Tom's office with his photograph watching me from the desk, I let myself cry. This is a long story, I know. But some truths take time to tell. If you're still here, thank you. Please take a moment to like this video. It tells me these stories matter. The weekend passed in a strange fog. I ignored my phone, which buzzed constantly with calls and texts from the Fitzgerald family. I ignored Bradley's messages asking me to reconsider, to be reasonable, to think about how this was affecting his marriage. Instead, I worked. I pulled out every file I had on Fitzgerald Holdings. Every financial statement, every property assessment, every employee review. I'd been preparing for my Monday takeover for months, but now I reviewed everything with fresh eyes. What I found didn't surprise me, but it did confirm my suspicions. Lawrence Fitzgerald was a terrible businessman. He'd inherited a profitable company from his father and had been slowly running it into the ground through poor decisions and nepotism. His son worked in marketing, but spent most of his time playing golf. His nephew managed property maintenance by delegating everything to contractors while collecting a six-figure salary for essentially doing nothing. The company was profitable only because the properties themselves were valuable and the rental income was steady. But expenses were out of control. Employee turnover was terrible, and they were charging below-market rents to maintain relationships with tenants who'd been there for decades. It was a business ripe for restructuring. And after Saturday night's humiliation, I felt no qualms whatsoever about restructuring it thoroughly. Sunday evening, I laid out my clothes for Monday. A black suit, severe, professional, uncompromising. Pearl earrings. My best heels, the ones that added 3 inches to my height. I was going to war. I might as well look the part. Monday morning, I arrived at Fitzgerald Holdings at 8:30, early enough to make a point. The building was in downtown Chicago, a beautiful old structure that had been converted to modern offices while keeping its historical facade. I'd always liked this building. Soon it would be mine to improve. Lawrence was already there when I arrived. I could see him through his office window, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. My assistant, a efficient woman named Gloria who'd been with me for 10 years, met me at my new office. Mr. Fitzgerald has been here since 7, she said quietly. He's called an emergency meeting with the senior staff for 10 o'clock. Cancel it, I said. I'll handle communications with senior staff directly. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked to Lawrence's office and knocked once before opening the door. He spun around, his face haggard. He'd aged 10 years over the weekend. Mrs. Lancaster, he said. Thank you for coming. Good morning, Lawrence. Shall we talk in the boardroom? The boardroom was impressive. Dark wood paneling. A table that could seat 20, windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The kind of room designed to intimidate. I took the seat at the head of the table. My seat now. Lawrence sat to my right, and I could see his hands shaking slightly as he opened a folder. I want to start by apologizing, he began. What happened at the wedding was completely inappropriate. Andrea has been beside herself all weekend. She'd like to speak with you personally to apologize. That can wait, I interrupted gently. Right now, I'd like to discuss the business. He blinked. The business. I've reviewed the financial statements from the past 5 years. There are some concerning patterns I'd like to address. I pulled out my own folder and began walking him through the analysis I'd prepared. Every inefficiency. every unnecessary expense, every example of nepotism and favoritism that was costing the company money. Lawrence's face grew paler with each page. "These are very aggressive assessments," he said weakly. "We've always run the business conservatively." "You've run the business into stagnation," I corrected. "Your profit margins have declined steadily since 2018. Your employee retention rate is 30% below industry standards. And you're sitting on prime commercial real estate while charging below market rents. Those are long-term relationships. Those are revenue losses. Starting immediately, all lease agreements will be reviewed and adjusted to fair market value. But Mrs. Lancaster, some of those tenants have been with us for 20 years. Then they've enjoyed 20 years of subsidized rent. If they choose to stay at market rates, wonderful. If not, we'll find tenants who appreciate the value." I pulled out another document. This one showed the organizational chart of Fitzgerald Holdings with my proposed changes marked in red. Lawrence stared at it like it was a death warrant. You're eliminating my son's position? Your son's position in marketing is redundant and unproductive. If he can demonstrate actual value to the company within the next 90 days, we can discuss reinstatement. Otherwise, he's welcome to seek employment elsewhere. And my nephew will be transitioned to a performance-based contract with a contractor management firm. His salary was unjustifiable given his actual output. Lawrence slumped in his chair. "You're gutting my family's company. I'm optimizing a profitable business that's been mismanaged for decades," I said calmly. "Your family is welcome to remain in positions they can justify through performance. But the days of salary for family name alone are over." He looked at me with something close to desperation. "What would it take for you to sell the company back to us? Name your price." I smiled, not warmly. "Lawrence, even if your family could afford to buy me out, which you can't, I've seen your personal financial statements. Why would I sell a profitable business to people who've proven they can't manage it effectively? Because it's our legacy. My grandfather built this company. Your grandfather was the junior partner in a venture started by my husband's family," I corrected. "You've been managing it. There's a difference." I stood up, gathering my papers. "Our meeting is concluded. I'll be implementing these changes starting today. You'll receive detailed documentation by end of business. Mrs. Lancaster, please. I have work to do. And Lawrence, in the future, when your family gathers to discuss the middle-class widow your daughter married into, you might want to mention that said widow now controls your family's primary source of income." I left him sitting alone in the boardroom and walked to my new office. Gloria was waiting with a stack of messages. "Mrs. Lancaster, Bradley has called 6 times. He says it's urgent. Tell him I'm in meetings all day. And Mrs. Andrea Fitzgerald has requested an appointment. She sounds quite distressed." I looked at Gloria, this woman who'd worked with me through countless business battles, who'd seen me at my strongest and my weakest. "Not today," I said quietly. "Maybe not this week. We'll see." By lunchtime, word had spread through Fitzgerald Holdings that major changes were coming. I could feel the tension radiating through the building. Fear, uncertainty, anxiety. Good. Complacency had nearly destroyed this company. A little anxiety might remind people that employment was a privilege, not a birthright. My phone rang. Bradley again. This time I answered. "Mom, what are you doing?" His voice was high, panicked. "Andrea said her father came home looking like someone had died. Her brother just called saying he's being let go. Her cousin is freaking out." "What's happening?" "I'm running a business, Bradley. But these are Andrea's family members. You can't just fire them because you're angry about what happened at the wedding. I'm not firing anyone out of anger. I'm restructuring a poorly managed company to maximize profitability and efficiency. If certain positions can't be justified through performance metrics, they'll be eliminated. That's standard business practice." "Standard business practice? Mom, these are people's lives." "Yes, they are. And for too long, those people have been collecting paychecks for work they weren't doing. That's not compassion, Bradley. That's enabling." The word hung between us. Enabling. "This isn't fair," he said quietly. "Neither is being called a pig at your wedding," I replied. "But here we are. I hope you're finding something meaningful in this story. If you are, would you hit that subscribe button? There's so much more I want to share with you." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, restructuring plans, and carefully worded company announcements. I worked 14-hour days, barely sleeping, fueled by coffee and something harder than anger, determination. The changes I implemented at Fitzgerald Holdings were significant, but necessary. Within a week, I'd reviewed and adjusted 17 lease agreements to market rates, restructured the marketing department, eliminating 3 positions including Lawrence's son's role, transitioned property maintenance to a performance-based contractor model, implemented new employee benefits that actually supported workers instead of just management, established clear performance metrics for all remaining positions. The employees, the actual working people, not the family members collecting paychecks for minimal effort, loved the changes. Morale improved almost overnight. People who'd been carrying the weight of family nepotism suddenly felt valued and seen. The Fitzgerald family, predictably, did not love the changes. Lawrence became a shell of himself, showing up to work but contributing little. Constance stopped calling after I declined her invitation to lunch 3 times. Andrea's brother left the company angrily, though he didn't have many employment options given his lack of actual work experience. And Bradley didn't know what to do with me. He'd call every few days, trying to negotiate peace between his mother and his wife's family, trying to find some middle ground that would make everyone happy. But there was no middle ground. Not anymore. 2 weeks after the wedding, Andrea finally showed up at my house. I'd just gotten home from work, still in my suit, exhausted to my bones. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, something in my chest tightened. She looked different than she had at the wedding. Smaller somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. Eyes red from crying. "Mrs. Lancaster," she said quietly. "May I come in?" I almost said no. Almost closed the door in her face the way she'd closed the door on my dignity at her wedding. But I'd raised myself to be better than my worst impulses. "Come in," I said. I led her to the living room. The same room where I'd sat with Tom years ago, planning our future, dreaming our dreams. Where I'd rocked Bradley as a baby. Where I'd grieved after Tom died. This room had seen every important moment of my life. Andrea perched on the edge of the sofa like a bird ready to fly away at any moment. "I owe you an apology," she began. "A real one. Not the half-hearted attempts I've been making all week." I waited. What I said at the wedding was cruel and inexcusable. "Calling you a pig." Her voice cracked. "There's no explanation that makes it okay. I can give you reasons. I was nervous, I was showing off for my family, I'd had too much champagne. But none of those are excuses. I was cruel to you. And you just paid for my entire wedding." She looked at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. "But I think you should know why I said it. Why I felt like I could say it." "Go on," I said quietly. "Bradley told me you were difficult." She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "He said you were controlling. That you used money to maintain control over his life. That you couldn't let go of him being your little boy. He made you sound like this suffocating presence he had to manage." Each word was a small knife, but I needed to hear them. "He said you ran a small property management company, and that you were probably struggling financially, but too proud to admit it. He said you'd insist on contributing to the wedding even though you couldn't really afford it, and that I should be gracious about accepting your help even if it wasn't enough." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So when I saw you at the reception, I thought I saw someone who was trying too hard. Someone who was dressed up in clothes she couldn't afford, trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers. And instead of feeling compassion, I felt superior. Smug. Like I was better than you, because I'd never had to try that hard. And the pig comment, I asked. I'd told my family about you beforehand. About what Bradley had said. About how you were this clingy, difficult mother-in-law who wouldn't give us space. They were all expecting someone. Well, someone pathetic, I guess. So when I pointed you out, I was trying to be funny. Trying to show my family that I had everything under control. That I wasn't going to let my new mother-in-law interfere with my life." She laughed bitterly. "And then my father recognized you. And I realized I'd just insulted one of the most successful businesswomen in Chicago. A woman who'd built an empire while raising a son alone. A woman who'd quietly purchased controlling interest in my family's company while we were all completely oblivious." Andrea looked at me with something like wonder. "You must have laughed so hard, watching us realize who you really were." "I didn't laugh," I said quietly. "I was too hurt. I know, and I'm so sorry. But Mrs. Lancaster," she leaned forward, "you have to understand that everything I believed about you came from Bradley. Every cruel thought, every dismissive assumption. Your own son taught me to disrespect you. The truth of it sat between us like a living thing. Why? I asked. Why would he do that? I think. Andrea chose her words carefully. I think he was ashamed. Not of you exactly, but of needing you. My family has so much money, and Bradley wanted to seem like he was on our level, like he'd gotten there on his own. He couldn't admit that his mother was supporting him, so he made you sound like a burden he was carrying instead of a blessing he was receiving. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my modest garden. And then last week, he came to me with something that explained everything. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Andrea turned back to me, her face pale. He confessed that he's been lying to me about his financial situation since we started dating. The consulting job he told me about? He lost it 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. The car, the apartment, everything. It's all been paid for by loans he took out using your name and credit as collateral. The room tilted slightly. He forged your signature, Mrs. Lancaster, on loan applications, credit cards. He's been committing identity theft for almost a year. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He told me because he couldn't keep lying anymore, and because he'd just found out you'd discovered the truth. How much? I whispered. Almost $120,000. The number sat in my stomach like lead. He's destroyed everything, Andrea said softly. His relationship with you, our marriage, my family's business. All because he was too proud to admit he needed help, and too cowardly to stop lying once he started. She came back to the sofa and sat down, this time less carefully. Mrs. Lancaster, I can't ask you to forgive me. I said something unforgivable. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand that Bradley's entire narrative about you was a lie designed to protect his ego. And I understand that I should have formed my own opinion instead of accepting his. I looked at this young woman, this stranger who'd married my son, and I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Honesty. Real, painful honesty. What are you going to do? I asked. I thought about the question. Really thought about it. Because I confused enabling with love. I said finally. I thought being a good mother meant removing every obstacle from his path, making everything easy, saying yes to everything he asked for. I thought that's what my husband would have wanted. And now I realize I was teaching him all the wrong lessons. I taught him that he could take without giving, that he could receive without gratitude, that he deserved support without having to earn respect. I looked at Andrea directly. I created the man who taught you to disrespect me. So in some ways, this is my fault too. No. She started to protest. Not the cruelty, I interrupted. That's on you and Bradley. But the entitlement that led to the cruelty? That's on me. I spent 30 years teaching him he was the center of the universe. I shouldn't be surprised he believed me. If this story is touching something in you, would you leave a comment telling me what it is? I read every single one, and they mean more than you know. Andrea left an hour later. We didn't hug or make promises about the future. But something had shifted between us. An understanding, maybe. Or at least the foundation for one. That night, Bradley called. Mom, Andrea told me she talked to you. She did. Did she tell you about the loans? Yes. Silence. Then, I'm so sorry, Mom. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. Why, Bradley? My voice was quiet, tired. Why did you do it? Because I was ashamed, he said, his voice breaking. Andrea's family has so much money, and I wanted to be worthy of her. I wanted to be successful and independent like you raised me to be. But I wasn't. I was drowning, and I couldn't admit it. So you committed fraud using my identity. I know it's inexcusable. I've already talked to my lawyer. We're going to handle it legally, properly. I'll pay you back every penny, even if it takes the rest of my life. It's not about the money, Bradley. I know. It's about the lies, the betrayal. The fact that you've been painting me as a villain to your wife while committing crimes in my name. I know, he said again, and I don't know how to fix it. I looked at Tom's photograph on my desk, thought about the man he was, the father he would have been if he'd lived, and I realized something. Tom had been a wonderful man, but he'd also been too easy on Bradley, too willing to give him everything he wanted. If Tom had lived, would Bradley have turned out any different? Or would he have still grown into a man who took everything and appreciated nothing? Bradley, I said carefully, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done enabling you. What does that mean? It means I'm paying off the loans you took out in my name, because I won't let fraud be attached to my credit. But you're going to pay me back. Every penny. With interest. On a payment plan we'll establish legally. Okay, he said quickly. Yes, absolutely. It means you're going to keep your job at Fitzgerald Holdings, but you're going to earn your salary. No more nepotism. No more coasting. Real work or real termination. I understand. It means no more birthday checks, Christmas gifts, emergency loans, or surprise financial help. You're 31 years old. It's time you learned what independence actually means. Mom. And it means you're going to therapy. Professional therapy to figure out why you thought lying and stealing were acceptable solutions to your problems. He was crying now. I could hear it in his breathing. I'll do all of that, he said. Whatever you want. Just please don't give up on me. I'm not giving up on you, I said. I'm believing in you enough to let you face the consequences of your choices. That's not punishment, Bradley. That's love. After I hung up, I sat alone in the quiet house. The house Tom and I bought together. The house where I'd raised our son. The house full of memories of who we'd been and dreams of who we'd thought we'd become. And I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore, or hurt, or even particularly sad. I felt free. Free from the burden of trying to be everything for everyone. Free from the weight of unconditional giving without boundaries. Free from the belief that a good mother meant a mother who never said no. The doorbell rang around 8 that evening. I almost didn't answer. I was tired. So tired. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw Lawrence Fitzgerald standing on my porch. I opened the door. Lawrence, this is unexpected. Mrs. Lancaster. He looked haggard. More tired than I felt. May I have a moment of your time? I led him to the living room. The same room where I'd sat with Andrea hours earlier. I came to discuss the business, he began. The changes you're implementing are necessary and final, I interrupted gently. I know. He slumped in his chair. I know they are. I've known for years that we were running the company poorly. I didn't want to admit it. He looked at me with something like defeat. My father built Fitzgerald Holdings into something real, something meaningful. And I've spent 20 years slowly destroying what he built because I was more interested in providing easy jobs for family members than in actually running a successful business. Lawrence, no, please. Let me finish. He took a breath. You're a better CEO than I ever was. The employees already respect you more than they ever respected me. The changes you're making are what I should have made years ago. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is my resignation. Effective at the end of the month. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Lawrence, I'm not trying to force you out. I know, but I need to go. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding behind my family's legacy. He stood to leave, then paused. Andrea told me she apologized to you today. She did. Good. That's good. He looked at me with something like sadness. I'm sorry too. For laughing at the wedding. For not stopping my daughter when she said those terrible things. For underestimating you so completely. Thank you, I said quietly. At the door, he turned back. You know what the ironic part is? If we'd known who you really were, we would have treated you like royalty. We would have fallen all over ourselves to impress you. I know, but you shouldn't have had to be impressive to deserve basic respect. You deserved respect as Bradley's mother, as a human being, as the woman who paid for that entire wedding. Yes, I said simply. I did. After Lawrence left, I walked back to Tom's office and looked at his photograph one more time. I think we would have gotten here eventually, I told him. Even if you'd lived. Bradley would have grown up entitled. I would have enabled him. And eventually something would have broken. Tom's photograph smiled its unchanging smile. But maybe this breaking was necessary. Maybe this is what teaches him to become the man you wanted him to be. I picked up the photograph and held it close. I miss you, I whispered. Every single day. But I think I'm going to be okay. Better than okay. I think I'm finally going to be myself. We're almost to the end now. Thank you for staying with me. If this story has meant something to you, would you take a moment to share it? Pass it along to someone who might need these words. 6 months have passed since that September wedding. 6 months since I was called a pig and discovered I had more power than anyone knew. 6 months since everything changed. Fitzgerald Holdings is thriving. Employee satisfaction is up. Profits are up. We've expanded into 3 new properties and restructured our entire approach to commercial real estate management. The company that was slowly dying under Lawrence's management is now one of the most respected firms in Chicago. Lawrence retired as planned. Last I heard, he'd taken up woodworking and was actually enjoying himself for the first time in decades. Constance has stopped calling me, but she sends a Christmas card every year. It's something. Andrea's brother found a job at a marketing firm where he actually has to work for his paycheck. According to Andrea, it's been good for him. Humbling but good. Bradley is still employed at Fitzgerald Holdings. He works in the acquisitions department now, and from what his manager tells me, he's actually quite good at it when he applies himself. He's been in therapy twice a week for 6 months. He's paying me back $2,000 a month from his salary. It will take him 6 more years at this rate. We have dinner once a month. At my house, where I cook simple meals and we talk about his work, his therapy, his life. He doesn't ask me for money anymore. He doesn't complain about how hard things are. He's learning slowly what it means to be responsible for himself. It's not the relationship I dreamed of having with my son, but it's honest. And maybe that's better. Andrea stayed with him. I was surprised by that, but she explained it to me over coffee one morning. He's broken, she said, but he's trying to fix himself. And I think we're both learning who we really are without all the lies and pretenses. They're in couples therapy now, in addition to Bradley's individual sessions. They moved out of their expensive apartment into a modest 2-bedroom in a less fashionable neighborhood. They're learning to live within their means. Last month, Andrea started working. She got a job at a nonprofit that helps low-income families find affordable housing. She says it's opened her eyes to a world she never knew existed. A world where people struggle and sacrifice and survive without the safety net she always took for granted. I was so ignorant, she told me, about everything, about how most people actually live, about what it means to work for something instead of just expecting it. She's learning. They're both learning. And me, I'm learning too. I'm learning that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling. It's fear dressed up as generosity. I'm learning that being a good mother doesn't mean removing every obstacle from your child's path. Sometimes it means letting them stumble, letting them fall, letting them figure out how to stand back up on their own. I'm learning that respect is earned, not inherited. Not by family connection, not by blood, and definitely not by writing checks to cover someone else's mistakes. And I'm learning that it's never too late to reclaim your own power, your own worth, your own life. Tom has been gone for almost 20 years now, but I talk to his photograph every night still, and I think he'd be proud of what I've become. Not the successful businesswoman. He always knew I had that in me, but the woman who finally learned to say no, who learned that her own happiness mattered as much as anyone else's. Last week, I had lunch with Andrea. She wanted my advice about a situation at work. We spent 2 hours talking about nonprofit management, about helping people without enabling them, about the fine line between compassion and codependency. At the end of lunch, as we were saying goodbye, she hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us. On Bradley. On me." I hugged her back. This girl who'd called me a pig. This woman who was learning to be better than she'd been raised to be. "Thank you for being willing to change," I said. Change. That's what all of this has been about, isn't it? Not revenge. Not punishment. Just change. Sometimes we need to be broken before we can be rebuilt into something stronger. Sometimes we need to lose everything before we understand what we actually have. Sometimes we need someone to stop enabling our worst behaviors before we can become our best selves. I don't regret paying for that wedding, even knowing what I know now, even remembering the humiliation of being called a pig in front of 200 people, because that wedding was the catalyst for everything that came after. That moment of cruelty was the beginning of honesty. That public humiliation was the start of private transformation. For me, for Bradley, for Andrea, for all of us. Last night, I had dinner alone, something I do more often now, and I've learned to enjoy the peace of it. I made Tom's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in our dining room, looking at his empty chair across from me. We did okay, I told him. We made mistakes. We enabled when we should have challenged. We gave when we should have let him earn. But Bradley is going to be okay. He's learning, growing, becoming someone real. The house was quiet, just me and my memories and my hard-won peace. And I realized something. I wasn't lonely. I was content with my work. with my life, with the woman I'd become after being called a pig at my son's wedding. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best versions of ourselves. Sometimes cruelty cracks us open in ways that gentleness never could. Sometimes we need to lose everything before we can find what truly matters. And what truly matters isn't being loved unconditionally. It's being respected honestly. It's setting boundaries that protect our dignity. It's teaching people how to treat us by showing them what we'll accept and what we won't. I'm 62 years old. My son is learning to be a man. My daughter-in-law is learning to be a person of substance instead of style. My business is thriving. And me. I'm learning that it's never too late to stop being taken for granted. Even by yourself. Especially by yourself. So if you're reading this, if you've stayed with me through this long, painful, redemptive story, I want to tell you something. You don't have to accept cruelty. You don't have to enable dysfunction. You don't have to sacrifice your dignity for someone else's comfort. You can love people and still enforce boundaries. You can support people and still demand respect.